Greetings, Ohio Valley. This is Dan Lima with OSU Extension from Belmont County.
And this is Karen Cox from WVU Extension in Ohio County. Thanks for tuning in to Extension Calling, your source for research-based information for the farm, garden, and home. Hey friends, we need your help. In order to help keep this show going, we need to hear back from you. Please take some time and check out our evaluation. Let us know if you like the show, and especially let us know if you've used any of the information you've gained from our show. Once again, you can reach us directly. You can call Karen at 304-234-3673. That's 304-234-3673. Or you can reach Dan at 740-695-1455. That's 740-695-1455.
Greetings, Karen.
Hey, Dan.
You know, last time we were talking about the color change, it does feel a little chilly. I mean, I was wearing a jacket some of the evenings that I've been outside. So yeah, we're there. And I know it's slightly below average temperatures right now, but that just means that we're getting into the fall.
That's right. Yeah, the temperatures are dropping and we're starting to think about that first frost coming. And one of the things that's really exciting about this time of year is it's when pawpaws start to ripen.
That's right. So not only the temperatures dropping, but the pawpaws are dropping too.
Well, honestly, I have never actually seen a pawpaw hit the ground. They're usually eaten by critters long before they get to the ground. But I also am not as familiar as you with cultivated pawpaws. So we're going to talk a little bit about cultivated pawpaws and wild pawpaws and just have a lovely little West Virginia banana day.
Yeah. So let's talk about the pawpaw. And, you know, you're referring it as West Virginia, but West Virginia is not the only suitable habitat for pawpaws. Pawpaws do really well and ranges from anywhere from New York all the way down to, I want to say northern Florida, but just maybe like, you know, we're talking more so the Mississippi, Alabama, northern Mississippi, Alabama area. And that's kind of the range of pawpaws because they do require a chill for vernalization.
Right. I just want to clarify that we're talking about the North American native pawpaw, which is Asimina triloba.
That's it. Yes.
Pawpaw is also the Carica papaya, which is a tropical fruit that is located more in the southern states and also in the islands and things like that. But that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about our North American pawpaw, Asimina triloba.
Asimina triloba. That's correct. It is considered to be, how do they say it? They say it's the temperate tropical fruit.
Right. Yeah. It's in the custard apple family, or Annonaceae, and it is mostly a tropical plant, but we have this little weirdo that likes to get chilled.
Yeah. So that just means that for vernalization, which means that there has to be a cold treatment. There has to be certain hours of chill. So temperatures below 40 degrees. So the bud is required to receive 400 hours of temperatures below 40 so that it transitions into floral buds and then they open up. What happened in 2023, some frost hit us pretty hard in April, even spilling over into May, followed by a dry spell. I was recently at the Pawpaw Festival in Albany, Ohio, which is a great event. A lot of good knowledge there, great speakers. Ohio University and Ohio State University collaborate well with the North American Pawpaw Grower Association. Sometimes they're referred to as the Ohio Pawpaw Grower Association. When we had the Ohio Pawpaw Conference in Columbus, Ohio at Ohio University, we worked with them quite a bit, and it would not have been what it was without them. So, you know, a little shout out to them and great information. They have great websites if you're interested in learning more about pawpaws. But they do require that chill. And because of that frost that we got, they estimated that the pawpaw yield for 2023 was 5 to 10% what it normally is.
Wow.
So it was just such,
Ouch.
Mother Nature sometimes really just, you're going to have fluctuations, right? And sometimes, having that diversity and having those outliers makes a big difference on the propagation of a species, right?
Yeah.
So imagine 90% of the flowers come out, in this window, right? But then you have 10% staggered. That might be a little early. That might be a little bit later. In this case, probably the ones that came out a little bit later are the ones that we're seeing the pawpaws for, but really just not a big yield. So for fresh fruit, there wasn't that much there, but when we talk about pawpaws, you can process them and you can get, you can freeze the pulp. You can process it in other ways, but usually pulp processing is kind of the number one utilization for the fruit. And the pulp that was used for a lot of the foods that were at the festival and a lot of pawpaw products that we're getting today were from last year's harvest or maybe even earlier. But because the fruit took such a hit this year and we did not see a lot of fresh fruit, I think next year it's going to be hard to find pawpaw products in general. So we'll see how that goes. But it does require a chill, which is why you don't see them a lot in the southern states. But growing zone 5 is where they like to be. Karen, you and I are on Route 40. But anyway, Route 50 is like where you have DC to Parkersburg, and then it goes further west. To a lot of people, that is kind of the pawpaw corridor of the United States. And they seem to do really well. You find a lot of them along rivers, like riverbanks and such. And a lot of people thought that could be because pawpaws do like moisture, but they do require a certain amount of drainage. So when you're looking at pawpaws in the wild, typically you see them in riverbanks. And then you're kind of associating the water level. USDA found that most pawpaws like about 4 feet above the water table. So you do see them in riverbanks, but what we're finding as well, some producers that were at the festival were kind of talking about this, with the larger rain events that we've had, and Karen, you and I have talked about this quite a bit, we're getting these 2-inch rain events that have saturated the soils, especially in the clay soils. And they're finding a lot of issues with pawpaw trees and that heavy moisture.
Yeah, they definitely do not like heavy waterlogged soil. They do want that lighter weight alluvial riverbank soil that drains really well.
And that's exactly where I was going, Karen. And you just hit the nail on the head right there. So when we were like looking at the habitat for the pawpaw, one of the things that people first thought of was, okay, it likes to dip its roots in the water because it does have that really long taproot. So I imagine it does, but it's really that sandy bank that at least people are now looking at as one of the reasons why we're seeing them, which is really affecting the way that we are looking at them for an orchard setting purpose. One of the things that all the growers basically said, and this is something that I think is an agreement across the board, is that to get fruit, the plant needs sun. Because if the plant isn't getting enough sun, what it'll do is it'll drop the fruit. It'll put its energy where it needs to go, whether it's root reserves, whether it's growth. And then fruit production is typically one of the lesser important things for the life of a tree. So when a pawpaw tree is growing underneath a large canopy, it'll be there just fine. It can do with shade, but you're not going to get good fruit production unless it gets sun.
Right.
Maybe not like 100% sun all the time, but the majority of the day should be in sunlight.
Right. So when you're looking at wild pawpaws, they will produce fruit, but they're not going to produce nearly the same quantity of fruit as something that's grown in a field environment with full sun. Now, with that being said, there are some really important steps you have to keep in mind when you're trying to grow pawpaws in full sun, and that is that the babies do not like full sun.
Right. And that's initially too. One of the things that they were talking about was, if you look in the literature, you will find that they recommend partial shade for the first couple of years of a pawpaw planting. You're typically going to get a small saplings, 1 or 2 years old, and going to put it in a site that you want. And one of the things that has been recommended is putting like a piece of cardboard or just having some kind of shade for the setting sun. So the like western shade, in that way, the small sapling doesn't get too burned up by heavy sun. And it's one of those things, Karen, I'll be honest with you. It seems like that maturity level is going less and less and less for the needs of shade, right? So, a couple guys actually just said, for the first few weeks, for the first 2 leaves, for the first 3 leaves or whatever.
Really?
Give it some shade so it doesn't burn it up too bad. There is some variation in there. But last year I grew some pawpaws and I did some overhead shading, which was good. They did fine. This year I did some lateral shading. So I put the shade cloth vertical, like perpendicular to the ground. So it kind of blocked off the sunrise and the sunset.
Okay.
And then I had another batch of pawpaws that I started where like the shade cloth, I ordered the wrong stuff. Okay.
Happens to the best of us.
This is how major discoveries happen, right? You order the wrong thing and you're like, well, let's see how they do. and I'll be honest with you, my 2023 planting did not receive any shade. And they did really well. I don't know. It's kind of one of those debatable facts, I think, out there. And that's why we do research, right?
Well, it also could be connected to the variety that you're growing. Because, believe it or not, there are almost 50 varieties of pawpaw that are out there. And so depending on what nursery you get your stock from, it might be a variety that's happier in the sun, or maybe you're getting one that would be happier with a little bit less sun to start out. So I think variety is going to come into play a lot on that. I
think you're absolutely right with that. And the topic of variety is one that really needs to be brought up a lot. There are varieties that are open. They don't have a patent. They're a little bit easier to get. And then there are varieties that people patent. They collect royalties from that variety. One of the things that you need to realize, I think a lot of people that are wanting to starting pawpaws, is the seed doesn't breed true to the parent plant, right? So if I have a seed from one of the name cultivars, we'll say sunflower, Susquehanna is another one, but we'll say, I purchase these seeds from a cultivar. I plant the seed. The seed isn't going to be the exact genetics as the parent plant. So a seed from a sunflower cultivar from Pawpaws, I know I got to make sure I say that right, because if you're just tuning in, it might get confusing, isn't going to be the same as the parent. It's going to have genetic variation, right? Just like a brother and a sister, to their parents. So one of the things that we have to recognize too is that when you're purchasing seedlings, they're not cultivars, even if the seed comes from a cultivar variety. To get a cultivar, you need to get a grafted pawpaw. It's very hard to root pawpaws from cuttings. So what they do is they take a seedling, grow it for a year, 2 years. Typically, you want to say the diameter of the stem should be about the size of a number 2 pencil. And once you have that, you can take the scion wood, which is another name for the cutting off a branch. And what you'll do is that you will graft it onto that wild seedling that you purchased or that you have. And at that point, you'll have the root system that is one genetics, and then you'll have the scion. So the apical meristem, or the top, is going to be of the genetics of the cultivar itself. So it'll be an exact clonal copy of that parent plant. At that point, what you have is a grafted cultivar, and those are going to be a lot more expensive than getting a wild plant. One of the things that you have to be careful about, though, is that what we are finding with pawpaws is that they do like to outcross more than they like to self. So first off, they're not dioecious. They have perfect flowers, so they have both male and female. So you don't have male and female plants. But what you'll have is you'll have a delay in the maturity of the carpel, which is the female part that receives the pollen and fertilizes the ovules, and the stamens, which is the male part. So if everything is of the same genetics and ripening happens exactly at the same time, that will cause the plant not to self, which is actually pretty common in nature. You want the diversity, you want variation.
Sexual reproduction.
Sexual reproduction, exactly, because you want to be able to have variation for what we talked about at the beginning of the show. The frost that just devastated the pawpaw crop this year. So having genetic diversity is really good. So having a few wild plants in the mix of some cultivars that have been proven as far as fruit quality and fruit size is really beneficial. Some of the things that you want to make sure that if you're starting, if you have a pawpaw and you collect some of the seeds, some of the things that you might look into is, hey, I got these seeds. I'd like to produce my own wild pawpaw trees, just have a few out there, maybe graft into those, maybe not. But one of the things that people have seen quite a bit, especially the breeders out there that are producing the rootstocks and the plants, and what they're finding out is that seed from the pawpaw cannot dry. So if you are harvesting seed that you want to plant, so right now, you get your hands on a pawpaw and you get a hand, like you eat the fruit, you probably love it. I'm going to assume that everybody loves pawpaw out there, and and you're not eating the seeds, you're not eating the skin. They don't taste good anyway. Seeds typically have chemicals in there that no matter what the fruit, eating seeds isn't a good practice anyway. So you're spitting those out, those big seeds, and you're cleaning the seed, you're putting it in water. The best thing to do is to make sure you get it as clean as possible. Some people even said like a mild bleach solution. A lot of people don't. A lot of people just kind of put it into a bucket, as clean as they can make it. You're not going to get all the pulp out. And once it's kind of sitting in there, it'll clean itself, right? Like the longer something sits in water, the more it'll soften up and everything. And once you get a nice clean seed, it takes 70 to 100 days of moist stratification for you to be able to plant that. So stratification is a cold treatment, this time on a seed for germination purposes. You have to be careful because you don't want that seed to freeze, but you want it to stay between above 32 to 40, 45 degrees. Probably between 40 and 32 is the best range for that. So you need a stratification process to make that seed viable for germination. So once you get your seed, the idea is to put it into a bag, like a small Ziploc bag with sand. Some people use mulch, but like just a little bit of moisture. You got to be careful with mold and stuff with mulch. Sand is probably your best bet because it can hold moisture. You don't want to see like water sitting at the bottom of the bag, just kind of moist sand. Put the pawpaw seeds in there, zip it up, put it in the refrigerator for 70 to 90 days, which should take us to about April. Actually, it'll take you, if you're planting it in April and May, you'll get more than 70 to 100 days, which is fine, but you should have pretty good germination. And at that time, you'll be able to grow that seed and have your own sapling as well. So if you do have a pawpaw patch, one of the things that pawpaws are notorious for is having a lot of rhizomes, right? So when you have rhizomes, you have a lot of underground roots, and you'll have different trees come up with the ground of the same root system. Well, those are all genetically identical. So one of the things I told you is that pawpaws do like to outcross more than like to incross. Self is the best, is the word I was looking for. So one of the things that people are also doing is taking a wild planting and just mixing it in there so that you now have all those trees that are the same genetics have a better chance to pollinate because you've introduced some new genetics into that patch. So that's another thing people do. But just remember that if you really want to focus on fruit production, that pawpaw tree really needs sunlight. There's a reason why we call it orchard style planting, because you're mimicking what they do for apples and peaches and pears. Sunlight does equal energy, which then equals fruit. So those are just some of the things that people that are producing pawpaws for marketing purposes, are going that route, and they're doing a lot more orchard plantings than they do stuff in the understory of the woods, even though that's kind of the area that we've seen traditionally pawpaws grow wild.
Yeah, and I want to make sure that we give some mega props to Kentucky State University. They have done a lot of research on pawpaws and have a lot of really great publications on pawpaw production and pawpaw consumption. And so, if you are curious about pawpaws and you want to learn more, we highly recommend checking out Kentucky State University's research program on pawpaws. And Dr. Kirk Pumper is the program leader there. So he would be a great contact as well. So if you want to learn more about pawpaw production, you can reach out to your local extension office, or you can reach out to Kentucky State University. They have a lot of really great information.
That's right. Yeah. And if I didn't say it earlier, I apologize, but Kentucky State University is really leading the charge on the pawpaw research and just being able to utilize this native tree that produces a really good fruit that has a lot of history to it, tracing all the way back to the Native Americans that were in this area. There's rumors that it was George Washington's favorite fruit, Karen. There's all kinds of stuff. One thing I do want to talk about, though, is if you are purchasing trees, one of the things that you want to make sure that you're looking at for tree production is if you're getting a tree, you want to make sure it's in a deep pot. That taproot is very brittle, and it seems to be really important for establishment. So if you're looking for pawpaw trees, I would recommend a nice deep pot, 9 inches. Sometimes they go to 13 inches. Basically, it doesn't matter how. It is important. The bigger the pot, the better. But what's essential for healthy saplings is a deep taproot. So you want to look for deep pots when you are purchasing trees. And then, just make sure that when you're planting it, that you are paying attention to that taproot and that taproot doesn't get broken. So they're very difficult, and you only get one chance to put a tree in, right? Isn't that what you say, Karen?
Yeah.
You only get one chance, and you got to make it count. So get a nice healthy tree and make sure it's got a nice root to it, and just be very delicate with that taproot.
Right. A lot of people contact me wanting to transplant some pawpaws that they found in the woods because they do grow in a little clonal colony, and there's usually a whole bunch of them. So if you are going to try to transplant a tree, if you're trying to get one of the rhizome sprouts, then you need to do a little extra prep work in order for that to be successful. You can't just cut it off of the main plant and expect it's going to have a big enough root system to survive. And so one of the things we recommend is to go in and create that size of the root ball that you are going to be able to carry over. And the larger the root ball, the better, but it has to be small enough for you to actually be able to carry. But to go in and cut that root ball like the year before you're planning to transplant it. And of course, during that time, you're going to be preparing the soil that you're transplanting it to, making sure it has a lot of organic matter, that it's well draining. And so you're prepping where you're moving it to. And one of the things that's really critical with pawpaws is to recognize that they do like that acidic soil. So typically you'll find them in those areas where there's been a lot of tree litter and there is an acidity to the soil. They're happy even in a 5.7 pH soil. So the more acidic the soil is actually okay for pawpaws. So, but you want to prep that area so that it's really well draining, has a lot of organic material. And so while you're waiting for that little sproutling that you're trying to transplant to develop a new root system after you've cut around it, make sure you go out and water it, make sure it has access to water because it can easily dry out once you cut off that main root system. So keep an eye on it, water it as if you just planted it, and then the next year transplant it out. Also recognize if you're taking something from a highly shaded environment and putting it in full sun, it will have shock. So you want to keep that shade cloth on it and slowly expose it to more and more sun over time. You don't want to just take it right out of a nice shady woodland and put it right in the middle of your orchard field and expect it to be happy, because it will not be.
And one last thing before we wrap up the show, because we've been talking pawpaws for a while now. One last thing is, one of the tips that they gave if you want to try to transplant something in the woods is, because it has rhizomes and all the trees are connected. One of the things that one of the guys was talking about was, what he would do is he would take a shovel and just kind of cut around one of the trees, like in the wintertime. So when the tree is dormant.
Yeah, dormant is important.
So when that pawpaw tree is dormant, he found success in being able to cut those lateral rhizomes around the tree and transplant that thing early in the spring. And that was just something that he tried.
So he found success without waiting that extra time, just cut it in the winter.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's, you try things, sometimes this pawpaws are kind of a novelty specialty crop out there. We're kind of slowly cultivating them from the wild as right now. So it's exciting stuff. People are discussing what they're doing. The universities are doing the research to find out. We're just making progress as we go.
That's right. And make sure you reach out to your local pawpaw organization if you are wanting to become a producer. Great resource for what works for you and what works for them. And also, of course, reach out to your extension office and we'll get you hooked up. Hey friends, we need your help. In order to help keep this show going, we need to hear back from you. Please take some time and check out our evaluation. Let us know if you like the show, and especially let us know if you've used any of the information you've gained from our show. Once again, you can reach us directly. You can call Karen at 304-234-3673. That's 304-234-3673. Or you can reach Dan at 740-695-1455. That's 740-695-1455. Thanks for listening to Extension Calling. This show is a collaboration between OSU Belmont County Extension Educator Dan Lima and WVU Ohio County Extension Agent Karen Cox. If you'd like a transcript of this show, contact us at the office. Also, let us know if you enjoy the show by ranking us on your podcast app.